Hi there, welcome back to the channel. I'm Carrie with Blue City Picking, and if you are new here, I am a part-time reseller that heads out to garage sales, estate sales, local thrift stores to see what I can find to flip for a profit on eBay. Today is Ching number 20. Hard to believe that on my YouTube journey I'm already at number 20, but thanks for coming along and checking out the video. In addition to the Ching, I'm going to throw in a few minutes at the end of the video to kind of answer a question that I got about how much time do I spend on eBay or on this reselling business every week as a part-time seller. So I've got that broken down, and there's timestamps below if you want to just go ahead and skip to that. So without any more time, let's get into the numbers. I had a pretty great week. This was for the week of January 12th through the 18th. I had $1,000 in gross sales, and so that is inclusive of fees, taxes, etc., and shipping that the buyer paid. I had $860 in like sales price, excluding all of those things. I had paid $162 for that inventory. And so my profit this week was $556.99, which is pretty darn amazing. I will tell you now, spoiler alert, I had an amazing sale this week that I will cover at the very end because it came in on Saturday. And then I had a couple of good ones that covered. But what I will tell you, I had 2 days in the middle of this week where I literally sold one thing. So on the 13th, I sold one thing, and on the 14th, I sold nothing. And then the 15th started to come back, and then the 16th, 17th, and 18th were good. So I was pretty discouraged at the beginning of last week, but then it ended up coming back and having one of the better weeks that I've had. I mean, it definitely beat out the last 2 weeks that I've been tracking all of these things in the same spreadsheet. So my minimum, I actually lost money on one thing that I was clearing out, and then my max profit, I'm going to save that one for later. But my average profit per item was $18.57, which is perfect. My goal is 15. And I sold 30 items this week, so on 29 different orders. So not quite my goal of 35 items. My goal is 35 in, 35 out each week, so I can keep my inventory in check. So I didn't quite beat that this week, but it is what it is. That's okay. I had some big sales, so I'm fine. Let's go ahead and get into this. First item that sold was a vintage Sarah Coventry brooch. This was a bamboo twig letter, and it was an eye. I got this in a jewelry auction lot from back in June. I have already recouped all my money on that, so I have zero cost of goods attached to this. It sold for $5.50, and so I made $4.19. When I tell you what it sold for, it is what it sold for, excluding shipping, taxes, and fees. Not excluding shipping, taxes. It excludes shipping and taxes. And then my gross profit excludes fees. So sold for $5.50. My gross profit was $4.19. Next item was something that came out of my parents' clean out. This was a pink J. Jill jacket, jersey lined. It sold for $19, $0 cost of goods into it. And so my mom gets $15.94. I forgot to say about my average days in the store. So that one took 25 days to sell. The brooch took 183. Last week, my minimum was something sold in a day. Maximum was something that took 310 days to sell, but my average was right around 111 days. So a little under 100% sell through on average, which is good for me. Next up is a set of W.M. Rogers extra plate serving spoon and fork. This came out of an auction lot back in May, excuse me, to which I have already recovered my money on. So I have zero on this one. Sales price was $7 and I made $5.56 after 194 days. Next order was a lot of 2 new old stock Atari parts that I picked out of a Whatnot auction back in December. Buyer paid $16.10. I had a cost of goods of $1 each, not $1 each, $1 total. And so I made, oh my gosh, $15.10 after 32 days. Next up is an item that was one of my better sales, but I don't know if I would pick it up again just because of the long tail on it. This was a new old stock vintage play school ballerina 1995 set. I paid $22.61 for this at an auction back in May. It sold for $89.80, and so I made $49.93 after 225 days. Now, great profit. It took a really long time to get it though, and I know I could have taken that $22 that I put into this and made more than $50 over the last 225 days. So it's really a personal decision on what you want your model to be. Are you going for longer tail, high profit items, or vice versa? It's up to you. I end up doing like a mix of both, just because of the time I have available for this venture. My apologies, I have a scratchy throat today. But you know, you got to pick what works best for you. Next item is a ball canning jar. This was a number 5 with the lid. I paid $4 for this as an estate sale back in March before I knew any better. It sold for $10, and so I made $3.37 after 310 days. Would not pick that up again. Next item is an Eileen Fisher organic cardigan. It was a size 1X. It was a linen blend. I paid $9.11 for this at Goodwill back at the beginning of December. It sold for $29, so I made $15.19 after just 11 days. So there's an example of something that I paid $9, but I made $15 in like less than 2 weeks. That's a no-brainer for me. But, you know, some people are like, no, I'd rather make $30 to $40 per item. That's great if you can find it. But I have not found those all that available in my area. So once again, you got to do what works for you. Next up is this Harry Potter Danielle Nicole Ravenclaw shoulder bag. This was a clean out from my personal collection, so I have nothing into it. It sold for $19 and I made $15.66. It had been listed for 229 days. Next up is an Afmao Me Meow. If you don't know who Afmao is, she's a YouTuber. This was from one of my daughter's clean outs. It was 0 into it. Sold for $8.82. Profit of $6.90 after 172 days. Next is a set of, no, it's not a set. It is a vintage travel mastermind game. I picked this up at an estate sale back in May. I bought it in a huge lot of travel games, so I have nothing left into this. I think the whole lot was $2. And so this sold for $8.37, and I made $7.12 after 225 days. Next item is something I wouldn't pick up again. This was a MCM Crackle Glass Owl vase. I paid $6.25 for this at an estate sale back in November. I thought it was going to be worth more. When I did my comps in the sale, it was showing much more. Ultimately, it just didn't pan out, so I was happy to go ahead and get this moved for $9.72. So I made $1.93, but it sold in 23 days. Next item actually came from the same estate sale. This was a vintage Etienne Anier, like little coin purse. I paid $2 for this. It sold for $12.99, so I made $8.70 after 43 days. Next item is a pair of Converse. This was for the charity that I sell for sometimes. They sold for $20. That made profit $17.63. So that will head over to the charity. Next item is a set pair of Trunks Surf and Swim shorts. These sold for $8.78. I had $2 into them, so I made $4.81. I'd had these since last April and had bought them at Goodwill, so I was happy to go ahead and get these out after 265 days. Next item is a vintage 1983 Masters of the Universe, like Snake Mountain part. These were the chains. One of them was broken though. So I did price it accordingly, and I did provide the broken one in case somebody wanted to try to fix it. The buyer paid $8.10. I had $1 into it. I made $5.21 after 30 days. Next up is my worst sale of the week. This was a Freddy Funko dressed as Western Ken. This came out of a mystery box from maybe last fall or summer. I just gotten it listed. The buyer paid $9. I think I had about $15 a piece into the box, and so I lost $8.20, but it had only been listed 20 days. Next item is something that I sold for a second time. I sold these about a month ago. They were returned. I relisted them. They sold again pretty quickly. This is a pair of leather pants. The buyer paid $38.90. I paid $6.99 for them, and at Goodwill, I think I bought them originally back in July. Excuse me. So I made $26.31 after 179 days. Keep in mind that I did have to pay the return shipping on the prior return, so still making 20 bucks on it is fine. If they come back again, then I'll have to make a decision on whether I want to list them again or not. Next item is a Coach brown canvas replacement strap. I picked this up at a local thrift store at the end of the year for $2.07. It sold for $20, and so I made $14.10 after a day. Next item was a very large ceramic pottery piece. It was a Talavera donkey planter. I paid $10.73 for this at Goodwill back in December. It sold for $70, and so I made $48.91 after 37 days. This one was an awkward one to ship, so not sure I would pick it up again, even though there was a really good profit after a short amount of time. I'm still a little bit worried on whether it's going to make it there safely. I've had a lot of breakage in these winter months, despite all of my efforts, double boxing, wrapping in paper, then bubble wrap, then paper, then bubble wrap. Like, it doesn't seem to be mattering just because it's so darn cold outside. I think it makes the breakables more breakable. So we'll see. I hope it makes it safely, and I'm on the edge of my seat on that one. Next item is a new old stock Veggie Tales. It was a book and a cassette tape. I paid 50 cents for this at an estate sale back in December. It sold for $25, and so I made $19.36 after 29 days. Next up is a set of seasons 1 through 4 Curb Your Enthusiasm DVDs. I bought these at an estate sale back in August for $7 for all of them. They sold for $18.95, and so I made $7.90 after 153 days. Next is a Fuzzamallow. I do not recommend picking up Squishmallows, Fuzzamallows, pretty much anything to that effect. This came from one of my kids' closet cleanouts, so I have nothing into it. It sold for $8.93, and so I made $6.94 after 171 days. Next is a cross-stitch sampler. It said something to the effect of "Fear knocked on my door and I answered," or something like that. I paid $2 for this back in November at an estate sale. It sold for $25, and so I made $18.54 after 65 days. Excuse me. We've had some colds going through my house. Next item is this women's maternity dress. I bought this almost a year ago at Goodwill for $6.99. It has been marked down. It has been put on sale. It is on kind of like my final markdown. So it sold for $11.79. I made $8.65 after 298 days. Next is a vintage Carter's baby blanket. It was a waffle knit with a satin trim. I paid $2.07 for this at a local thrift store back at the end of December. It sold for $24.65, and so I made $18.99 after 10 days. Next up is an Ertl vintage die-cast F15. I paid 67 cents for this at an estate sale back in December. It sold for $12, and so I made $8.14 after 30 days. Next is a Disney Cars 3 Miss Fritter. So Cars 3 has some unique characters in it. Miss Fritter, if you find the die cast of her, actually sells pretty good. There's a couple other ones that sell really well. I think Mr. Drippy or something like that is one of them. I picked her up at an antique mall locally for just a couple bucks. She sold for $12.60. So I made $6.73 after 17 days on just this little car, which is fine for me. Like, easy to list, easy to ship. I enjoy listing those. They're fun, so I'm good with it. Then last, before my sale of the week, this was a lot of 3 kind of handmade push pin sequin ornaments. I bought these back in August for $1 a piece, so I have $3 into them. I did not want to sit on these through another Christmas season, so when I got an offer for $12, I accepted, and they went out, and I profited $6.14 after 156 days. Some additional numbers on the allocation. Oh, my big sale, I almost missed it. This was a huge lot of Oneida flatware. This is the Brahms pattern. It is a very popular pattern. I've seen multiple resellers talk about it. I was already familiar with it, so that when I went into one of my thrift stores at the end of December, and I happened upon a cart of things being put out, and there was just a pile of like a bunch of individually wrapped pieces of flatware. Of course, I picked it up and I was like, holy smokes, this is Brahms. Each set of 4 or something like that was marked for like $1.99 or $2.99. I picked them all up because I know what it's worth. So I ended up paying about $55 for all of the pieces here. This was 12 place settings. So 12 place settings of the 5 pieces. It had some servers with it, and I threw in an extra place setting just in case. It sold for $299. I made $198.81 after just 12 days. I could not be more pleased. I have some other Brahms listed that I have just put as like multi-quantity, and you can buy as many as you want. Those have not moved. So after the success of this, I'm thinking I'm going to see what lots I can put together with the Brahms that I have and see if I can repeat this success or not. So back to the other numbers. As far as where my profits came from this week, they primarily came from the local thrift stores. I had a couple really good sales from local thrift stores between the Brahms, the baby blanket, the Coach strap, and then some of the things for my parents and the charity. That was about 50%. About 20% come from Goodwill, 11% from auctions, and about 15% from estate sales. As far as the genre this week, it was definitely more weighted to like house items because of that large $200 sale of the flatware. So that was at 56%. But even with that, I still had 20% on toys and 25% on clothing. Pretty negligible on the collectibles this week. All right, so that was the sales for the week. If you're not necessarily interested in how much time I spend on my part-time reselling business every week, feel free to just disappear. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I've earned a like and subscribe for you from you, and so thank you very much. But as far as how much time do I spend as a part-time reseller? So generally my week consists of shopping, drafting my listings, taking pictures, actually listing, and then shipping. So my goals, and I think I mentioned this earlier, what is 35 in and 35 out each week. So I shop, draft, and do all that with the 35 in mind. So shopping, it ends up being about 2 to 3 hours a week. Honestly, that's about all I have time to spend. There are weeks where I don't even really go shopping at all because I don't have time between my personal life and my full-time job. And then there are weeks where I have extra time and I may go for 3 or 4 hours in one day and knock out a bunch of different thrift stores and estate sales, and I'm good for the whole week. So usually 2 to 3 hours a week. Drafting, and that is finding maybe a similar listing of something I'm trying to sell, get that ready for pictures, and pull that together. I usually spend about an hour to an hour and a half on that. If you think about 35 listings, it takes me a few minutes for each listing to get that ready, know how much it's going to weigh and all that. For photos, that will take about an hour or two as well to get through 35 photos. Like this morning, before work, I was able to knock out 32 listings photos in about an hour. So I'm pretty efficient with my time when it comes to the ability to take photos. They take about 3 to 5 minutes each, and then I bag them and I inventory them. So I'm putting that time in there as well. I do have my oldest daughter help me sometime with photos. She is not as efficient as I am, which is perfectly fine, but I pay her for her time, and usually sometimes she will help me out with that. On listing, every day I maybe spend 10 minutes on this, and that's taking, 5 items that I've had in my drafts with photos that are ready to go and pushing those. I send offers in the morning at the same time, and then around every other day or maybe a couple times a week, I'll do a big end and sell similar, which doesn't take very long at all. On shipping, 20-30 minutes a day, so probably about 3 hours a week on shipping. It depends on what I'm shipping. Like you saw earlier, I had that massive pottery donkey. That probably took me 20 minutes just to get that thing packed up and ready to go on its own. Whereas like Miss Fritter probably took me 2 minutes, right? Like there's a big range in how much time you have to spend. So that's why I say like, maybe 3 hours a week on shipping. That might be overly generous, but it is what it is. And then I also do accounting on keeping track of my expenses, inventory costs, etc. on a daily, weekly basis as well. So it usually takes me about maybe half an hour a week on bringing in expenses, making sure I'm tracking all of my receipts so that I keep my tax liability as low as possible, putting cost of goods on it, and making sure everything is in there appropriately. And that comes to about 10 to 12 hours a week. I feel like that's a reasonable amount of time. It's not too much. It can ebb and flow. The reason I picked this particular, I guess if you're going to call it a side hustle for a part-time, is that if there are weeks where I can't do this, it's not the end of the world, right? It's not like I won't sell anything. It's not like I can't, just end and sell similar and push new listings that way as opposed to other. I try to have a decent amount in my draft bank. So if something happens, like I'm not feeling super great today, my husband's sick, my oldest daughter's sick, like we've got a lot of stuff going on just personally right now that is requiring my attention. And that's just life. So that's why I'm grateful for this to be a part-time and that I don't rely on it for everything, but it really does make a difference in our daily life, the extra I'm able to bring in. So if we do some fancy math here and I say, okay, I spent 10 hours last week on reselling, I made $557 in pure profit. Put $50 of that over for taxes, just being super generous or whatever. I still made $50 an hour for my work. That's pretty darn good for something that I like to shop. I like to treasure hunt. So that's fun for me. I do my drafting and listings a lot of times while I'm sitting on the couch, spending time with my family. So it's not something that is awful for me as far as extra time. So I'm really pleased with that. There are weeks where it's maybe only $25 an hour, but show me a part-time job that you can flex the way this does and make that kind of hourly rate. If you can show me that, please let me know, because I'm definitely interested. So I hope that is helpful for everybody. If you're curious about the accounting software that I use, or like, how do I keep track of all my expenses? How do I make sure that this is profitable? You know, some of the tactics and things that I use, just let me know. I can do another video or share some of it in the links down below. Happy to do whatever. But thank you so much for tuning in to Ching number 20 and how much time I spend on this as a part-time reseller. Hope to see you in the next one. Check out these playlists of all the other cha-chings if you're curious what is selling on eBay these days. And if not, check out one of my most recent videos. It's probably a shop with me at a thrift store, where you can see how I go about that process as well. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.